Okay, hi, good afternoon. I'm Nick Poels. I'm part of the KU Leuven Research Coordination Office, and I'm the Publication Repository Manager.
And I'm Dieuwertje Blomen. I'll probably win the award for most difficult name today. But I'm also the product manager of Radar, which is our institutional research data repository, and I'm the technical product manager of Lirias, which is our Elements instance.
To give some extra background, KU Leuven, for the people who don't know, is the biggest university within Belgium, and some also say the lower countries like the Netherlands and Luxembourg. So combined with those two, we would be the biggest. We are going to talk about datasets and their importance at KU Leuven, how to register your publications or your datasets in Elements. We have our own data repository and also how we get the datasets around in KU Leuven. Actually, the previous presentation was a perfect background about the importance of datasets. So I don't really have to talk about the open science and open data anymore. But just like the European Commission, in Belgium, we have the Flemish government of the Dutch-speaking part of Belgium, and they noticed, hey, the Europeans are really up to something, we have to follow them. So they created a Flemish Open Science Board, and that Flemish Open Science Board created their own metadata model for datasets. Within Belgium, we have to report our publications to the FRIS portal, the Flanders Research Information Space, and that's how Flanders knows what's happening with all the research money that they give away. And they also build up their KPIs and track the KPIs via that FRIS portal. So with the whole story of datasets, there were two challenges for our university. One is that we need to ensure that the researchers can report all their datasets, no matter where they published it. And of course, we want to make sure that for those departments or research fields that don't really have their own specific dataset repositories, they can create their own using a KU Leuven website. The highlight was a bit later. So within KU Leuven, our Elements instance is called Lirias. So if I say Lirias, translated to Elements, it's short for the Leuven Institutional Repository and Information Archiving System. And because the Flemish Open Science Board created their own metadata model for datasets, that meant that we in Elements, of course, also had to change the dataset template in order to make sure that we could meet those requirements, which meant that we had to create a lot of custom fields within Elements to meet them. And we also had to use the link options in Elements more, because also in FRIS and for the KPIs, they told us the data set has to be connected to an article, and if that article is connected to a project, that's part how the data set will be counted for the KPIs. So their focus, again, even though the data set was published, was it has to be linked to an article, and only then it will be counted for the KPI. So we had to start experimenting with, oh, they have nice links in Elements. We can now actually use them to link different publication types together. And of course, we have also our publication lists that researchers use. So in order to have that nice citation that they can use from their publication list, we had to also check, okay, we have to make a reference title, and we have this custom field, and it has to fit in there so they can use the data sets again on their list. So this is what our Lirias looks like, and I just wanted to highlight some of the fields that we had to create. All of our publication types within Elements have the field, this is a data set or publication by a KU Leuven author, because we have to know, do we have to report it because it's part of their KU Leuven research or not? And then the other fields are all part of what the Flemish Open Science Board told us we had to provide. For example, an alternative title. We also had to include the contributors, which was already an available field. Technical information, identifiers other than a DOI. So if they don't have a DOI yet, there's a list that they can choose from. And if they choose another one, they also have to provide that identifier, but we can't make it required yet, that if they choose something, that field has to become required as well. Some local coding, so if a department has their own sort of code on how to share things, they can add it over there. And most importantly, access rights. So what are the access rights on the data set itself? Is there an embargo? If so, let us know when that embargo will end. If there's a legitimate opt-out and a license on the data. So if the researcher published their data set in a repository that's really field known, they have the ability to add that data set's information in Lyrias so they can use that to report. And now I'm going to give it over to Dieuwertje, who did the technical work.
Yeah, so radar is more of my part of the story. I am responsible for the technical side of Lyrias, but this is also the functional responsibility of myself. So we call it radar, but it's written as RDR, just to make it even more complicated. It's the institutional repository to publish what we call finished data in, and it's based on the Dataverse open source software. And again, we customized it to make sure that it's in line with the FOSP metadata model. And we've set up a connection to Lyrias elements, and via our Lyrias, we report to FRIS, which we're obliged to do. And that's basically what I'll be explaining in the next couple of slides, how we've connected our elements instance with our Dataverse setup. It's important to note that we have a curation phase in our Dataverse, which means that we can skip the verification phase in elements because we're already checking the metadata in the source. And on top of that, so next to disseminating the metadata to elements, we also send it to OpenAir, FRIS, and Google Dataset Search, and other aggregators alike. For example, the EOSC portal is coming up, which is the European Open Science Cloud portal. So the first step that we had to do was to make sure that any metadata that is attached to datasets published in our Dataverse actually gets registered in elements without people having to enter all the metadata again. So that's the first step that we did. Even before we went live with our data repository, we made sure that we could get all the metadata in Lyrias via a nightly export. It's very simple. We use a little Python script to do the mapping between the two APIs, and then it just gets sent to elements. I think it's a local source 2, source or 1. I think it's a 2 one, but it doesn't matter, but that's how we do it. And then our next step was to, oh, my arrows have all switched. That's fun. Basically, the next step was to also make it work in the other direction, because there are a couple of fields on data sets that you need to fill in that require metadata that are already present in elements. For example, if you fill in a related publication, you have to provide the DOI or a citation, and a citation can be created with the metadata that is in elements. So that's what we did. We set up a lookup using a COVOC server or controlled vocabulary server, which allowed us to, instead of having to manually enter the citation and the DOI and such, that they could look it up if that publication was already in Lyrias. How did we do it? Well, we already had a discovery platform using Limo, which is part of the Ex Libris software Primo, and it has a really great search API, so we use that. I don't know if I have a screenshot in it. Yes, I do. This is the related publication fields in Dataverse, and what we've done is basically added this little symbol, and if they click it, they open up a field and they can search on their name, their ORCID, their email address, or on keywords, and then they get all the results of publications that are in elements, and then if they select one, the fields get filled in for them. So they don't have to fill all of this in manually anymore, and we have the DOI and the elements source ID, the area source ID, to uniquely connect it to that publication once it gets back to elements again. Oh gosh, the arrows have really messed up a bit. Another integration that we also did a look up on is the connection to our SAP system. So basically it works the same way, but then for adding authors, they can pull in the ORCIDs that are present in our SAP system, the email addresses for the contact people, contact addresses, sorry. But on top of that, we also noticed that, yes, we have an institutional data repository, but we still allow for data to be published in domain-specific repositories. That's perfectly possible. And we want to capture that metadata in our elements instance as well. But asking them to fill it in manually is a bit unrealistic, we've noticed. So we really wanted to make it as easy as possible. So we set up a little tool, which we called our dataset claimer, and we really attached it onto Elements. We made it seem as if it was part of Elements, not to confuse our researchers, because they already get confused about the fact that radar is not the same as Lyrias. So we didn't want to add on to that. But basically, the tool allows the researcher to look up a publication in an aggregator like DataCite or OpenAir based on an author name, on a DOI, or on a keyword. They get a list of options, and then we pull in the metadata from OpenAir and DataCite, and they get it from the external repositories because they are reporting to OpenAir or they use DOIs, so they provide metadata to DataCite. OpenAir and DataCite both have really good APIs for metadata, so that helps a lot. And we also still allow that manual entry, but it rarely happens. That's just the situation. So this is what the little tool looks like. I just typed in my own last name and I looked for data sets. I got 27 results. I chose one of them and all the metadata was filled in that I could find, but I immediately get the opportunity to correct it or to supply more metadata because we notice in our Lyrias if metadata ends up in Elements, sometimes they forgot that they sent it there. And then it just gets left there and we never can get it to the verified stage. And what we also added here is the same implementation with the lookup. So again, they can look up publications in Lyrias here as well, and we save the Elements ID to connect again. And then the last thing we did is via Lyrias report to Fris. So that's again, just metadata gets sent there, the connections with all the different outputs, so between data sets and between publication, but also between publication and project, which is provided by SAP, but the link is put in Elements to make it really easy. But anyway, something we added there that might be interesting to mention in that little script that we use for the enrichment part is that if a data set is connected to a publication that is related to a project, then we've made sure that that data set inherits that connected project so that we don't have to ask them to connect it again. So that's our setup of metadata of data sets within KU Leuven. But I also have to be completely honest, and it's just this part so far because we are really good at adding on things to our Elements instance. But I'm not going to talk about that. So thank you very much. This is, by the way, how a data set looks in Dataverse, and this is how it appears in Elements. So yeah, thank you very much. If there are any questions.
Do we have any questions whilst Nicholas comes up ready for the next talk? Yes?
When you showed the lookup, what were you actually in at the time? When you were, what was that screen from? Was that from, not familiar, that's from your Dataverse?
So I'm assuming it's this one. Right? Wait. Am I just there? This one? That's Dataverse, and then on top of it, so the pop-up that you see in the background. So these fields are Dataverse, and the pop-up that you see is we've added it onto our Dataverse. It's part of the Dataverse source code now because we contributed it to the community because Dataverse is open source, but that's not part of Elements. But we pull the data that is in there from Elements. If that makes sense. Okay, great.